Around 12 years ago, I was working security at a small company's headquarters in New York City. My partner for the night had called in sick, so I had to work from 12 to 6 all by my lonesome. Now, normally this wouldn't be a problem. I just had to sit in the back room, watch some cameras, and occasionally head out for a sweep. Nothing to it. Well, as it turns out, one of the employees had stayed in the building after hours and had managed to avoid my coworker's sweep from the previous shift. I first noticed a movement in my peripheral vision on one of the screens, and then again a few minutes later. This was odd because I was used to quiet nights in this particular building. I was a little scared when I headed out for my sweep, but it was my job, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to begin. I had to start the sweep in this one big hallway, and right as I entered, I saw a flash of movement towards the end of it. At this point, I was sufficiently freaked out. I stood frozen for a minute or two, looking into the semi-darkness, unsure of what to do. The decision was taken out of my hands, however, as I heard a gunshot resound down the hallway. In what was the scariest moment of my life, I slowly walked down that hallway to investigate. I reached the end and saw to my left that the president's office light was on. Slowly, I approached the door and creaked it open. What I saw will forever haunt me. The man had taken a seat in the president's chair and shot himself. In any case, I threw up a few times and called the police. I got the next 2 weeks off, but I still have nightmares about it sometimes. I worked the night audit at a semi-swanky hotel next to the airport. One night, I get a call from a lady in room 204. She says there was arguing, loud banging, and crying coming out of 206. I look up on the computer to see that no one is checked into that room due to maintenance. I call my supervisor to see what to do, and she tells me to call on-site security and follow them up with a key. As we get up there and get off the elevator, we can hear the crying. It's pretty loud. My heart starts racing as we near the door. I hand the key to the security guard. The next 5 minutes seem to happen in slow motion. He opens the door and immediately flicks on the light. Keep in mind, this is 206. We're on the second floor, and the only doorway in or out is right by me. And this is at like 3 a.m. and there's no one around. As we enter the room, we notice the shower is on and steam is coming from under the door. There's only one lamp on in the room and it's super cold. And there's a lady in a red lacy bra, black panties, and super red hair curled up crying in the bed. She was facing away from us as Frank approached her. He asked if everything was okay. She sort of stopped crying and rolled over. When she did, a wave of horror came over me. She was super pale, covered in blood, and was just staring behind us. That's when we realized the shower had stopped and the door was open. There was a man about 6'5" standing in the doorway. As we turned around, the cops showed up and tased him. It turns out he was a rapist who hides in hotel rooms, kidnaps women who stay there, and cuts them open. To this day, I will never go back to a hotel room again. I work the night shift as an EMT in a fairly large city. One night around 2 a.m. we get a call for a psychiatric problem in one of our more ghetto neighborhoods. Dispatch tells us to stage and wait for police to make contact first. So we're sitting maybe 2 blocks down the street in the ambulance, and I'm looking down texting when my partner grabs my attention. I look up and there's this lady walking down the street straight at us. We check the notes on the call and the girl matches the description. I just say forget that and we put the truck in drive and go around the corner another block or so. But I know weird stuff happens and assume she's probably just walking home. About a minute later, this woman turns the corner and is walking very fast now. We check the call notes again and see patient possibly armed, so yeah, another forget this moment and we drive onto a street that should have run into an outlet. But no, there was unmarked construction that night. We turn the truck around and this girl is just standing there about 20 feet away. I get out and ask her if she's okay. She stares at me and says, "Are you here for that crazy lady 3 streets over?" I say maybe, if we're talking about the same person. Her reply is, "Oh, she's fine," then gets dead serious and says, "I'd stay away if I were you." She walks back the way she came and we try to keep her in sight for as long as possible. Long enough at least that we could reasonably assume she's the patient. A few minutes later, PD gets there and clears us in. We go to the house and there are security cameras everywhere. No one answers the door and I'm checking in windows to see if I can see anyone inside. The house is just off. I can't really explain it, but I just knew it wasn't right. We never did make contact with someone and we never could confirm who the patient was. That night still gives me chills. This was when I was fresh out of high school and my first job. I worked as a machine operator for a factory doing graveyard shift. It was only me on the floor and the supervisor in the office. It was always a 2-man shift. Sometimes he came out to help me bring stock materials from the back storage. Now, this back storage was haunted, or so I was told by the previous shift worker that I replaced. I'm not superstitious and was skeptical about it. For the first week, nothing unnatural happened and it was reinforcing my skepticism. However, as weeks go by, I started to notice that the machines closest to the storage room entrance would turn on by themselves randomly. I also started to hear people talking in the back storage and seem like they're making noises doing some restocking. But when I go in there, the lights are off and it's dead quiet. Then this one time, my supervisor just finished helping me and said he'll be in the office if I need him. Well, about 20 minutes pass when a big crashing noise from the back storage scared the hell out of me. I called him to make sure it's not him either pranking me or crashing the forklift in the back. He came out from the office and asked me what the hell happened. I then freaked out and we both decided to check out the noise. Once again, the back storage light is off and it's eerily quiet. We turn on the light and we saw storage barrels toppled over and a broken crate with stock materials all over the ground. These crates are on a shelf about 5 feet off the ground and the barrels are full. We cleaned it up and he used the forklift to put the replacement crate with the materials on it back on the shelf, and I rolled and repositioned 3 toppled barrels back to the corner by the entrance. By the time we were finished with this, it was meal break, and he went out to get some food while I was left alone operating the machines again in this big factory the size of 2 football fields. I wasn't troubled or scared knowing he'd be back in a half an hour, but I ended up shutting down the machines and waiting for him outside. When he got back, he was surprised, and I told him to go by my station and tell me what he sees. There was one of the barrels that I had propped up, now on its side by the machine I was at. I told him that I didn't hear the barrel fall like earlier, or even hear the sound of a full barrel rolling and stopping by my side. Now, standing in front of the barrel, you get a good view of the dark entrance to the storage. It was also then that I heard a faint, creepy female voice coming from there, which is why I was waiting for him outside. We ended up closing the factory for the remainder of the night and explained the situation to the manager the next day. The manager thought I made this up and did it so I could leave early. The security camera, however, verified that the barrel just rolled out by itself from the dark storage area and stopped where I was, and you can see me coming into view to check where the barrel came from and quickly backtracking to turn off the machines. This prompted management to abolish the graveyard shift altogether. One of my duties at the mortuary I worked for was nighttime body removals. One night, my partner and I showed up around 2 a.m. to grab the paperwork for our removal. When we got inside, we both got the feeling like there was someone there. So we walked through the building, checking to make sure everything was secure and closing all of the doors. This included the casket room. Everyone hated the casket room. It was freezing cold year-round. The lights were always uncomfortably dim no matter what maintenance did to try to fix them, and there was this mannequin in the corner in full military dress that just felt wrong. The only people who weren't bothered by the room was the cemetery sales staff, and they always seemed kind of odd. My partner and I don't find anyone, so we lock everything up and head out. When we get back an hour later, we get our new guest logged in and decided to get a cup of coffee before leaving. We walk toward the kitchen only to find the casket room, with the door open about 3 feet. It's almost pitch black in there, yet I can barely make out the red in the mannequin's uniform. It should have not been that close to the door, or even at an angle that would have been possible for us to see it. My partner and I froze for a second, then I grabbed his wrist and we backed up into the kitchen and straight out the back door. It honestly felt like if we had gotten too close to that casket room, something bad would have happened. Neither of us would ever go near that room again, even during the day. I work at a crisis nursery, which is a child care facility that provides emergency and respite care for children under the age of 7. I used to work graveyards all the time. I have to say first that I am absolutely a non-believer in paranormal stuff. That being said, at 2 in the morning in a dark room when you and 2 or 3 other girls in their 20s are the only adults in the building, it can be creepy. The facility I work in was named for a child who was beaten to death by one of their parents. The nursery was started in their name as a way to hopefully prevent another child dying a violent death at the hands of a stressed out caregiver. So the story that goes around is that this kid's spirit haunts the nursery and is mostly active at night. They tell me that one of the reasons that everyone thinks this place is haunted is that many different people have reported different children asking about that kid. Like, why doesn't that kid have to go to bed while pointing at nothing? I always brushed it off and basically would forget about it. A few weeks later, I was in the sleep room where all of the kids sleep. There must always be an adult in the room with the children. I'm by myself and just relaxing reading a book with a book light, and the rest of the room is pitch black and silent. All of a sudden, this kid, probably 4 or 5, sits bolt upright in bed and says, "Hey, how come they aren't asleep? Why do they get to play? I want to play too." All while pointing at a wall with no kids anywhere in the vicinity. Instantly, crazy shivers ran all over me. I was so scared I almost screamed, and I refused to be in that room alone from that moment on. I'm a medic that primarily works night shift in the graveyard. We've seen some pretty freaky stuff, but this is the creepiest one that I can't explain, aside from the regular workings of the world. We got called out to a home for unknown reasons, man down, and we were first on the scene. A female frantically called and gave the address and apparently couldn't wake her husband up, and then hung up. Unable to call back, PD was en route but not there, and us thinking this quiet suburban neighborhood was safe, my partner and I went in fully loaded. Monitor, med bag, oxygen suction, everything. We've never had issues with this suburb before, it's all quiet old people. We figured this guy probably died of cardiac arrest and we were going to either have to work him or call DOA. The house was well kept and unsuspecting. We wanted to wait for PD, but every second counts in a potential cardiac arrest. We open the front door and all the lights are on in the house, but it's 2 a.m. Windows are open, drapes are flowing in the cool breeze, and we start yelling for people. "Ma'am, sir, medics, paramedic squad is here. Where are you so we can help?" Stuff like that. Luckily, there isn't an upstairs, but we covered the entire inside of the house. No one is there, not even animals. Empty, yet every light is on in the house. No bloodstains, no sign of a struggle, nothing. We radio in patient not found, please advise, PD still isn't here. We go back to wait by the truck, but leave our gear on the driveway in plain view. We didn't think to check the garage, but it wasn't lit and it had a stupid amount of locks on the outside. My partner and I were not about to get murdered searching the property or the garage. All of a sudden, my clock on my wrist beeps 3 a.m. and my partner's does too. We got dispatched at 1:57 and got there at 2:04. We looked on the computer. 3:01. We blink and rub our eyes. It's 2:15. What the hell was going on? PD gets there and we talk, tell them what we found, which was obviously nothing. They search and clear the house, but they think they hear a woman's voice from under the floorboards near the garage, and we heard it too. The lights flicker and go dark in the entire damned house. Windows and doors were open and a big rush of cool air comes and blasts us all. We heard thumps like someone trying to get out coming from the locked garage. Frantic and so thunderous. The firefighters heard it and came inside running. PD breaks down the door and calls in reinforcements. We find an older man, 50s or 60s, laying on his side in the middle of the 3-car garage. He was delirious and dehydrated with a broken hip and a few broken ribs. He had slipped on some motor oil he spilt earlier and couldn't get up or crawl on his own and had been there almost all afternoon and night. We ask, "Who was that woman that called? Your wife? Where is she?" He said that his wife had been dead for 10 years and that he didn't have much family. "Nobody lives in the house?" an officer asks. "Other than me, no," he replied. Then, who called 911? He couldn't answer. There was probably several explanations that could be perfectly plausible, but The whole thing just didn't sit right with any of us. The tension and unease was palpable. I like to think of it as the guy's wife still looking out for him. As much negativity as we see in the field, it helped me and my partner make sense of it anyways. I used to work at a cheese factory on the edge of a cornfield in southwestern Minnesota. There were a series of days in the summer of '04 or '05 where it was so hot that the milk being delivered to us in trucks would evaporate before we got it. It made work pretty easy. The lack of milk denied us any actual labor, but management wouldn't let us not come to work. So we would show up and mess around all shift. I was working nights at the time. It was 2 or 3 a.m. and I was out on the loading dock watching the bats fly around the floodlights. I liked being out in the cool night air. At the time, the corn was about as high as my shoulder, so around 5'10". As I was watching the bats, I looked down at the edge of the cornfield. Something was moving there. It was the size of a small child and very, very skinny, pale with something that looked like a head of straight black hair. It moved in a sort of jerky gait, like someone dancing the robot strangely. It moved its body in chunks, in sections. First the legs, then the hips, then torso, shoulders, neck, and finally head. It was looking back into the cornfield, or at least I felt like it was. I felt prickly all over. I didn't know what it was. At first, maybe a heron or something, but it looked too much like a person. It didn't move like one, though. Gradually, step by step, it moved towards me. Letting my curiosity better my fear, I moved towards the edge of the dock, which was raised a few feet off the ground. When I got within a few feet of the edge, this thing looked at me. I was paralyzed. I could have run, but I was stuck somewhere between terrified and intrigued. It moved, its face still pointed at me. It ratcheted its body in that disconcerting, jerky movement towards the cornfield and went into it. I tried to watch where the field moved as it passed, but the corn remained perfectly still. I noticed that all the crickets were silent. After a few minutes, nothing happened, but I stood out there for an hour. It never came back, and I never saw it again.